everybody. Now, before I get started, I'm trying to grow the channel and talk about the brain. And eventually, of course, we want to do the brain center in Camrose and the mobility center. So, please like, subscribe, share, whatever you'd like to do, and help us grow the channel. Now, today I am talking with to someone for whom I have a great deal of admiration and respect. He's accomplished a great deal and made a huge contribution to our society. And, the thing is, he's great, and yet you talk to him and he's still a humble person. Russell, I am so pleased to know you. So
Thank you.
now, before I get on with things, this fantastic person is Russell Shnell. Now, I know that you're a native Albertan, Russell. Where did you grow up?
I was born and grew up in Castor, which is a town in eastern Alberta, about 80 miles east of Red Deer, just on the edge of where the droughts get the crops about every 3 years.
Oh, wow. Now, you had a job at the UN at one time. Uh, I know you did a lot of fantastic things there, but briefly, can you tell us what that was about?
Yes, I'm an atmospheric scientist involved with measuring how the composition of the atmosphere is changing, due mainly to burning of fossil fuels. And I was working in Boulder at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and my boss said, "Hey, Schnell, how would you like to go to Africa for a while? The UN's looking for somebody to do measurements to see if you could put a climate station on top of Mount Kenya." And I said, "Oh, sure, okay." And about 2 months later, I had an interview in the UN in uh, New York, and um, about a month later, I was offered the job to go to Kenya to see if it's possible to put a station on top of Mount Kenya. But the clearance was delayed because I was quite young at that time, early 30. I must have been 31 or something. And the Kenyan government thought I was too young to do any project. But my wife was pregnant. And she's 7 months pregnant, 8 months pregnant. We got rid of our house, moved to a hotel, got ready to go to Kenya, and nothing cleared up. So I wrote them a email and or it wasn't email in those days. It was a what do you call those things? Anyway, I sent them a message and I said, if you don't let me come in next week, I'm not coming. So they said it okay. So my wife was 8 months and 28 days pregnant.
Wow.
So to get on the plane to go to Kenya, I sent her to the toilet and then I got picked up and said, "Oh, my wife is in the toilet. Can I please get her boarding pass?" And they said, "Oh, sure." And then we smuggled her on the plane, which, and fortunately, she didn't go into labor on the plane, but we had to stop in Geneva to get some final clearance. And she went into labor there, but it was kind of a false labor. Uh, so that night we jumped on a plane straight to Kenya. And the next week, our daughter was born in a native hospital. And my job was to shoo off the flies because the hospital, of course, was built by the British, and the British never had screens on their windows and doors. So, of course, the windows were all open because it was hot, and the insects would fly into the room because of course it was an attractive room to come into, and the birds would follow them in. There was insects and birds and me chasing them out, trying to chase them out. But our daughter was born fine, and she turned out to be a good child. She never learned to cry because we were living in an area where there was no children, and then I would take her, my wife Swan, and the baby with me to Mount Kenya, where we stayed in a lodge, and I went to work, and there was no children there. So, and well, of course, the baby was with us 24 hours a day. So if she had to poo, we knew it and changed her diaper right away. If she was hungry, we fed her. So she just never learned to cry. And I took her back to Kenya when she was about 10 years old. And the people who had known her, they said, "Oh, there's the baby that didn't know how to cry," because she never was around other kids. She never learned that crying was something you did to get your parents to do things. So,
Yeah, and she never had to cry because you were right there giving her whatever she
yeah,
needed.
and anticipating it,
Yeah.
and so that's just the way it was.
Wow. But you know what? That's pretty awesome too, for her anyway. Now you were there and then you came back to the States. What happened then?
I came back to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric in Boulder, and I was there for a few months, and then I was asked to go to Spain on another UN project to see, it was an aircraft project to see if you could make rain on the plains on Spain. So
Wow.
we flew around every day in clouds trying to see what their structure was like, to see if you could actually seed the clouds to make rain. And it was possible, but in the long run, it wasn't a practical and it wasn't worth the expense and the politics. So, but there, our daughter was about, oh, she was whatever, 8 or 10 months old. And we, of course, didn't speak Spanish. And the Spanish where we were located on a military base in northern Spain, nobody spoke English. So she watched TV. It was all in Spanish, and she picked up the cadence of the language. So later on, she became an excellent Spanish speaker. And when she speaks Spanish, they think she's a local because she picked up all the nuances and
Wow.
the cadence in the language, which she then used to go to the Peace Corps after she graduated in Bolivia, when spoke totally Spanish, of course, in Bolivia for 2 years. And she went to Bolivia because she went to college when she was 16. We didn't know much about how you apply for college in the US, but she applied and got in at 16, and she hadn't graduated from high school because you don't have to graduate. All you have to do is get accepted. So, so she
Oh,
went off to college at 16, graduated with a degree 67 when she was 19, but she couldn't get a job because she couldn't rent a car, uh, because she had to be 21 to rent a car. So she joined the Peace Corps for 2 years until she turned 21 and then came back to the US.
wow. That's unreal. Now, somewhere along the way, you ended up having an accident and so on. And then you started having um, some headaches and so on. So, what were the symptoms and how did they get to a diagnosis, etc.?
Okay, yeah, I was rear-ended in a car, and I had had slight headaches prior to that, but after that I had much more severe. So I assumed that when I crashed in the car that somehow something had happened to my neck or something. So I went to a doctor and said, I think the crash gave me a problem. And the insurance company, though, looked at that and sent me, of all things, to a dentist in another town. And he looked at my fingers and looked at my nose and said, "You've got a brain tumor, probably." And I laughed, but he sent me to another doctor and they tested me and I did have. So then I went to the University of Colorado uh, hospital to get a operation, and it's a teaching hospital, so they didn't charge me anything because the students did the operation, and it turned out very fine, I guess, yeah, because I was released after a week or so, and then about a month later, I was assigned to move to Hawaii to run the Mauna Loa Observatory. So it was a very interesting time going on there.
Wow. Now, I mean, number one, a tumor, especially a brain tumor. If that was me, I would be kind of worried for sure. Now, what can you just briefly describe the operation?
Yeah, before I went in, of course, they told me it's a pretty simple operation and people always usually survive. And so, but what they do is after you're anesthetized, your head is put in a frame so you can't move. And then they go in through the nose because the tumor was on the top of the spinal cord because they couldn't come in from the back, of course, or from the top. And they drill in and they know where it's at. And one nostril they're using a stethoscope with lights on it, and the other one is a machine. They go in there and open it up, and then they reach in and cut it out and pull it out, and then seal things back up.
Wow. Um,
There was no pain, no big issues. I went in the morning and I woke up in the afternoon and I was in a bed, and they said, "Oh, it worked fine."
oh, wow. That's a relief for sure.
Yeah.
Now, you ended up getting a job with, um, am I saying it right? I'm looking NOOA.
NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Okay.
It's similar to in Canada as the Environmental Service with the government, and it's an agency. The group that I worked with measures air all around the world because the composition of the air is very different than what your parents breathe, and it's very different if you have children what they breathe because all of the coal and oil that's underground was once in the air as carbon dioxide. The plants took the carbon dioxide out of the air, put it into the ground in vegetation and mainly plankton in oceans. So all the CO2 went out of the air and it was very warm. CO2 acts like feathers in a feather bed in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is not heated from above, it's heated from below. Sunlight comes through, hits the oceans and the ground, turns into long wave radiation. You've seen it on highways, those waves go up. But the
Yes.
CO2 and methane act like feathers in a feather bed. They hold that heat. So
Wow.
the atmosphere warms exactly the same way as you do. And when you go into a cold bed on a cold night, it's not the blanket and the feather tick that's heating you. You're heating it, and the air is holding exactly the same, the atmosphere. So what we have done now since the Industrial Revolution is essentially double the number of feathers in the blanket in the atmosphere. So the sunlight comes through, hits the ground, makes long wave radiation, goes up, but the feathers, there's more feathers now, so they hold more heat. That's climate change, all simple. So all of that CO2 that was in the atmosphere millions of years ago when it was really hot, Alberta had big uh, tropical trees and stuff
Yeah.
because of all the CO2, and it sucked the CO2 out of the air and put it into coal and oil, and then we went into ice ages and glaciers. And then eventually, uh, due to volcanoes and erosions, that CO2 starts coming back in and it starts warming the atmosphere up again. But
And
since we started digging up coal and oil and burning it, we're putting all that CO2 back in. So now the climate is getting warmer. It's a cycle that nature has done at least this three times on its own, but we're doing something that took millions of years and doing it in the hundreds of years.
We're accelerating it for sure.
It's incredible. And even if we stop producing CO2 today, we still have 100 years of warming because that CO2 doesn't go away. It slowly goes into the ocean, slowly goes into plants, but it takes a long time. So we've locked into a global warming. And NASA has just announced that their satellites that they've been watching the Earth for years have seen a complete switch in the way the winds are blowing now. Everything has changed, the balance. And because if you're putting in a lot more energy, you've got to redistribute it. And it doesn't redistribute it the same way as it used to because it looks for new balances.
Right.
So we're going to have a lot of changes. There's um, um, tornadoes forming in places which never used to have them.
Yeah. And
And
we're definitely getting more severe weather.
yes,
Yeah. As
because there's more energy, you're moving more energy, and the energy has to balance out. The energy move, hurricanes just move energy north to cool the Arctic. And in the winter, you get these cold fronts down. That's to get rid of the cold up there to balance. In the end, you're supposed to, it all balances out. Otherwise, you'd get colder and colder or hotter and hotter. But in doing this, the shifting around, the energy and the winds are changing to balance it all out.
wow. Well, Russell, you're explaining it in a way that even I can understand. So
It's so simple.
yeah. Well, you
It's
make
what
it
nature's been doing for billions of years. It's just we're doing it in thousands and hundreds.
rather than. So you mentioned Hawaii then. What was your job there?
Hawaii has this observatory that measures the atmosphere called the Mauna Loa Observatory, and it's near the top of a volcano, and that is where the CO2 increase in the atmosphere, CO2 was measured, was pretty well proven to be the case, because each year the atmospheric CO2 increases by 1 or 2 parts per million. So it was, and I was appointed director there to run that place. We lived down near the sea level, but the observatory is at about 12 or 13,000 feet. So when I would go to work, not every day up there because we had more staff, but you have to drive from sea level up there and then do your work and then come back down. And
Um,
and while I was there, uh, I added a number of new buildings because um, before I came there, people could bring experiments and stuff, but nobody would charge them for it. So it got to the point where we're running out of space and we're running out of money to monitor all this stuff. So I started charging them. And then eventually I went to different agencies and got money to build new buildings. So when I started there, there was 2 buildings. When I left, there was 13.
wow. So you definitely,
Had no cost to Noah hardly.
that's awesome. So, okay, and then from Hawaii into the Arctic. And what were you doing up there? I
There's in the high Arctic is very polluted, air pollution, and the natives call it haze. And during the Second World War, people did flights up there, and they realized, there's all kinds of haze, they called it, big brown clouds floating around in the Arctic, and nobody knew where they was coming from. And NOAA has a station at Barrow, Alaska, which is the farthest northern point in Alaska, and it's measuring, and every once in a while they measure this. So I was fortunate to be able to get a large 4-engine aircraft. The U.S. has aircraft they use for studying hurricanes in the summer. Hurricane hunters are called. But in the winter, they have nothing to do. So I convinced them to give me a plane for a couple of months, and we'd go to the Arctic and find out what this haze was. So they said, oh, great. So we put all kinds of instruments. I got scientists from all over the U.S. I offered them a free trip to the Arctic if they would put their instruments on and come along for a month and fly over the Arctic. So we did that, and we did that first one in 1991 or 92. and we found all kinds of pollution. So we flew over Alaska, then we went to Greenland, and then we went to Norway and flew up in there. And then the next, we did that 4 times every 3 years, we'd go up for a month. But when I was younger, I had gone to Russia a number of times, and I'd met scientists over there and people. And there was one uh, man, Glitzen, his name. His family used to be uh, close to the czars. They were princes in that, and he was a powerful scientist. So I got him to allow us to work with a Russian aircraft, and we flew together in Russia. And we took instruments and put them on a Russian aircraft, and then I got a Russian colleague to come on our flight so that we could speak. So we were flying together in the Arctic in Russian air and stuff, and we got all kinds of good information out of that.
That's amazing. It's good to see when, well, I was going to say countries cooperate, but that's because of the people, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
And
So,
and in Russia, years when I first went to Russia, I met a young man my age, and he was going into the military, into the Navy. So over the years, I kept in touch with him over 40 years. And then one of the last trips I made to Russia, he and I went out and I gave him a big bottle of malt whiskey from Scotland, and we both got drunk. And then I said to him, he went into the Navy. He became a captain of a nuclear submarine. He was a captain of one of those. And I jokingly said, when you retire, I want your last command hat. And we both laughed and then forgot about it. About 6 years later, in my office, somebody knocked on the door and said, Schnell? I said, yes. And he handed me a package. And it was his command hat. And
oh,
if you hold on a second, I'll show it to you. I'm going to go get it.
all right. And hey, for all you that are listening, I'm being blown away at how simple Russell has explained things, and like it's in a way that ordinary people can understand. And I think that's also part of the humility aspect um, of everything. Like he is, and we'll get to more um, uh, of what he's accomplished. And you will be blown away for those of you who didn't know before. Now, uh, oh, there he is. He's back. Oh, well, there you go.
That's
Wow.
a nuclear submarine commander's hat.
Wow.
And he remembered that. We were drunk. I didn't think I forgot all about it, but he obviously remembered.
That's awesome. Wow. So then, of course, you were involved with global monitoring for what, probably another 8 years or so, right?
Yeah, or more.
And then something happened in 2007 that I think was a major achievement. Can you tell me about it?
Well, Al Gore, who unsuccessfully tried to get elected for president of the U.S., was uh, he he wrote a book and he also was in a movie about climate change. And he himself never made any measurements. He just took other people. So there was a group of people uh, got together and produced a report, intergovernmental panel on climate change, took scientists from around the world and had them work for 2 years putting together a story that was unassailable. Climate change is here. This is what's doing it, da da da. And Al Gore took that and made a good story out of it. And then the Nobel Committee decided that was worth the Nobel Peace Prize because there's no prizes in meteorology, the Nobel Prizes. They were set up before meteorology and atmospheric science was even invented. So they gave a peace prize to the people who had Al Gore and the people who had written this report. And I was one of the people who had done that. But also they used a lot of the data I had collected over many, many years in Hawaii and around the world.
Wow. So in 2007, you shared the Peace Prize with Al Gore. That's
Yes.
awesome. Now, you ended up retiring, I believe, in about 2021. Now, I know that you have an unusual hobby. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I'll give you a little background. Uh, our daughter got married in St. Louis, where she went to university and stayed there. And her and her husband bought a very cheap house in a ghetto, a very big, old, beautiful house, 5,000 square feet with an attached house for almost nothing in this ghetto. And the houses across the road were uninhabited and beside it were burnt down and stuff. But on the weekends, she had noticed the kids that were in the area were roaming around, doing nothing, getting into trouble. And so she decided that they should get some books. She'd give them books. So she asked me to build something called a little library. I built one for her out of recycled material, and she gets very, very cheap books at something like a Salvation Army place where she'll get 10 pounds of books for $1 or something. She fills the library full and then tells the kids they can come and have as many books as they want Saturday morning. So Saturday mornings, the kids from all of this area line up and get all free books, you know.
Wow.
And and I thought that was a good idea. Oh, and to back up a little bit, I've flown so much on United Airlines that I can carry 140 pounds of luggage free anywhere in the world. So I can take libraries.
Wow.
So then I built one. I had some more lumber. I built one and put it in my yard. And pretty soon people were getting, I didn't put any books in it. They put books in it. People put more books in. I had to throw books away because there's so many. So yeah, this is a good idea. Then my daughter said, well, can you build two more for these schools in St. Louis? Because they don't have anything. So I built two and they were popular. And then one day the mayor of St. Louis was driving through the ghetto and he saw the library and he stopped and he said, this is a good idea. First library in a city of many millions was the one in her front yard. So he invited her and her husband to come and gave them a special award from the city and had a meal and an honorary, and she was written up in the newspapers and stuff. And it was called the Kick-Ass Award. It's for people who do something totally out of the norm, but do something good for the community. So, and it's really an interesting that she got a big metal picture of a kick-ass horse kicking ass, you know.
Wow. Wow, Russell. Now, Russell, we're just
Oh,
about out of
Oh,
time.
oh, oh, I
But
just want to tell you. So this thing caught on, and people all over the world that I know started asking me, well, could you build one for me? Sure. So I've built 129 of them now. I have them
wow,
on every continent on Earth. And I even took one and put it on the South Pole because I was responsible for a monitoring station there. I've been to the South Pole a couple of times. Of course, it was the pictures show it outside, but it's really inside a building because it's too harsh, but it makes beautiful photographs.
wow, awesome. Now, you're involved with an organization that's very near and dear to me, and I believe you're the honorary chairman. Is that right?
Yes.
And tell us about this organization.
Well, it's a an organization that was started in Camrose, near where you live, by Jane uh, Ross and her husband, and it takes people and interests that you wouldn't think about and develops them into programs. And one of the first programs they did was, in rural areas, bus service was taken away. So she and her husband and a group ended up developing a program where they have bus service now, taking elderly people mainly to Edmonton for their medical appointments, because how else will they get there? And also they bring students then to the university. You have a university in Camrose, which is 100 miles or more away from Edmonton. The foreign students fly into Edmonton. Okay, how do we get to Camrose? Oh, well, you can take a taxi. It'll cost you $600.
Mm.
So she said, why don't we have a bus? And they have a regular bus service that stops at the airport, then goes in, drops people off at the hospital, waits, comes back, brings them home. And it's really a good service. And that was one thing. Another thing then she did was found out that people needed medical equipment, little things for the toilets and little walkers and stuff. And how would you get them? But people would buy them. And then when they're no longer need them, what would they do? Throw them away, put them in storage. So she ended up developing a program where people can bring the unused equipment and it'll be repaired and then lend out free to other people. And that's really worked out well. And that has now developed to where they are actually using special equipment for people who have had strokes and need exercise. And that equipment is available and that's expanding the program. And then from there, she set up a conference called the Brain Conference to bring people together to talk about their experiences and generate interest. And now it's really catching on. And the idea is to eventually have a brain center of some sorts in Camrose. But of course, to do that, you got to get governments to buy in because it takes a lot of money to keep a program like that going. It's working, starting very well, but and now there's a book that's being put together from all of the contributions from the Brain Conference, and that will really generate more interest.
And I understand we have a follow-up conference in October of this year.
1 year anniversary, and the book should be finished and available. And it's hundreds of pages long, and you've got a story in it, of course, you know that, and I've got a story in it, and all kinds of people. So
So
it's gonna be pretty interesting that people in a small rural community that the cities tend not to look as having great interest, but Jane and Jack have put together people like that, and it's surprising what you find in these communities. Like a man started a rail or bought a railway in Alliance and has runs trains, and he was a farmer man. He just did that. And
I'm amazed at the variety of people. I mean, we had a Dr. Crive, and I believe he's Chicago or somewhere
yeah,
down there. And I mean, there's you, and I'm astounded. So basically, we need to tell people stay tuned because all has a lot of good stuff coming. And if you feel like supporting them, they definitely will appreciate that.
yeah, and all this is a short name for associative lifelong learning, but it's developed beyond. And Morris Fluelling got the Alberta government to put up something like $40 million to set up a heart uh, place in Red Deer. So if a person has a heart attack, they can go there and get treatment instead of having to go to Calgary or Edmonton like he did. And he convinced the government that it was important because Red Deer serves thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. But if you have a heart attack, you go to Red Deer Hospital, they can't do anything for you. They send you to Calgary, Edmonton in a helicopter or a train. So now they're setting that up and it'll save, like they think, 40 to 60 lives a year. It'll save
Wow,
just by having that.
that's awesome.
And he grew up on a little farm by Buffalo Lake.
That's unbelievable. Anyway, we only have about a minute left. Russell, thank you very much. I've so enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. And I'll send you a write-up about those little libraries that I've done and you can see pictures of them all over the world.
That's awesome. Thanks a lot, Russell.
Thank you for doing what you do. Uh,